Hello and welcome to a possible reboot of Nerdschnack. My name is Lea. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. What is this? This is a channel I've had for a while, and I haven't had any idea what to do with for a little bit. So when a few weeks ago the idea of doing a podcast about an almost forgotten TV series came up, I thought, okay, maybe I can do it here. The idea came up because my friend Dan Liebke, who I know from my cricket interests, he is doing a podcast about Lost, the TV series from the early 2000s that is today almost forgotten, which is kind of weird considering it was probably the hottest thing on TV at the time that it was on. And I was asking him about doing a podcast about Fringe, because Fringe and Lost both involved J.J. Abrams. And I think that in retrospect, Fringe is the better series. Without going into too many spoilers, I will explain to you what is Fringe, why you should probably be interested in it, what it's about, what are the themes. And please, this is just a kind of a teaser, kind of a pitch. If anyone wants to join me for any discussion of Fringe, please comment below, or if you found this on Blue Sky, you can always get in touch with me on Blue Sky. So please forgive me if this is not an exhaustive discussion of Fringe. That would be the point of the podcast, basically. I don't have any more. I don't have a structure in mind yet, a concrete structure. I don't have a title yet. I was thinking about a few, most of them in German, and you will know, or you will get why I'm thinking about a German title for it later, and I'll explain maybe some of my ideas. So yeah, this is basically just a teaser, a trailer, a pitch. If you would be interested in this, as I said, comment below or comment on Blue Sky. So let's get into it. What is Fringe? Fringe was a TV show that ran from 2008 to 2013 for 5 seasons. It was created by J.J. Abrams, Robert Orci, and Alex Kurtzman. And that's basically their whole involvement in this, I am glad to say, because I could understand if people are put off by the fact that it was created by J.J. Abrams, Alex Kurtzman, and Robert Orci. All three of them do not run the show for any length of time. The showrunners for the whole duration of the series are other people, which is good. So, with that out of the way, what is it about? It's about a government agency that investigates unexplained phenomena that occur in a so-called pattern that seems to be centered on a geographical center, but nobody knows what's going on. It seems a bit like the nature of reality starts to break down at certain points in this so-called pattern. And to investigate this, they kind of contact, let's call them contractors or advisors. They contact a very, very mad scientist, and they have to take his son as well in an advisory role, because he is the only one to be able to communicate with and control his very mad scientist father. He is what they call an expert in fringe science, or Grenzwissenschaft, which is the German term for it. And there is a lot of German, a lot of bad German in that series. So stand by for a lot of jokes about the very, very bad German in Fringe, because I'm German and my native language is German. So I will be making fun of that a lot. There are also shadowy conspiracies. There are very ambivalent mega corporations involved in all of this. There are some shadowy factions that don't seem to be connected to the pattern as such, but more to maybe the past of that fringe scientist, who is played by John Noble, who played the Steward of Gondor in Lord of the Rings. On your screen, he's to the right. To the left is his son, who is played by some guy from a 90s teeny soap opera, I think. He was one of the thirst traps in that. It's the one that made Tom Cruise's latest ex-wife famous. And in the middle is our third protagonist, Olivia Dunham, played by someone who was not very notable before and has done basically nothing ever since. But she's really good in this one. Yeah, so if your first reaction is, well, it's basically the X-Files, yeah, that's a pretty good, that's a pretty good starting point for thinking about Fringe, but it's not entirely true. In fact, I would say it's mostly untrue. Because apart from the fact that both are centered on the FBI investigating things that are very, very unusual and seem to defy our understanding of the world, there are basically no real connections or similarities here. Maybe I should explain that. So, let's start with the source material for the X-Files, or where those ideas in the X-Files, the supernatural, aliens, and conspiracies within the government come from. One of the stated influences on the X-Files was a TV series from the late 70s, early 80s called Kolchak the Night Stalker, about an investigative reporter that got into scuffles with werewolves, a mummy. I think some aliens were in there as well. So that's the supernatural, unexplained stuff, or unexplained side of the X-Files. The other side, the conspiracy stuff, comes from the 80s, from Art Bell's Coast to Coast AM, a very, very influential radio program in the conspiracy theorist scene, that was very, very unfocused. It was a call-in show where people with grievances with the government or experiences of extraterrestrial abduction and stuff like that could call in, and Art Bell would listen to them and talk to them and stuff like that. It's basically what today's Joe Rogan experience is. He's giving all sorts of cranks room to talk about their crackpot theories. And if we're talking about those kinds of circles, I think we need to mention Milton William Cooper as well, who wrote Behold a Pale Horse, a very, very 1991 influential book about conspiracy theories. It's basically the germination point for all these conspiracy theories that we see today on InfoWars and Alex Jones and all that stuff. It's the focal point of the UFO and militia circles in the 90s. And the X-Files took that as inspiration. It is okay to do that because the X-Files use it in the same way that Fringe uses other very problematic influences. And they just use it as an interesting backdrop for a story, or as a very interesting or fascinating starting point to write stories, fictional stories. They don't say this is real. In that regard, X-Files is to all that UFO space, Coast to Coast FM or AM, and Milton William Cooper, as Stargate is to the crackpot ancient astronaut theories of Erich von Däniken. And if we want to continue this analogy, then Fringe is to people like John Wood Campbell, A.E. Van Vogt, and L. Ron Hubbard, as Stargate is to Erich von Däniken and X-Files is to all that conspiracy stuff. If that makes any sense. Or better yet, let me elaborate a bit on these three men, Campbell, Van Vogt, and Hubbard. John W. Campbell was a very, very influential editor in what is now, or who started what is now known as the golden age of science fiction in American science fiction magazine publishing. He was the editor of Astounding, and he is credited with discovering Robert Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke, and Isaac Asimov, generally thought to be the big three of the golden age of American magazine science fiction. He also bought stories from people like A.E. Van Vogt and L. Ron Hubbard. He was also a crank. He believed in stuff like the Dean drive, which was a reactionless drive, which I'm not surprising you here, I hope, was a hoax. Because a reactionless drive is basically a perpetuum mobile, and that would violate the laws of thermodynamics, so it's impossible. It's basically a machine that produces energy without any input in terms of any other energy. He also published Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, which was the foundational text of Scientology written by L. Ron Hubbard, who was by all I can see, from what I have read, and what I have read about him, was one of the more talented hacks in the early pulp fiction or pulp science fiction circles. He was a very prolific author. Some of his stuff is, let's call it, imaginative and not half bad, at least as far as pulpy early modern science fiction goes. He had a fascination with what could be called human development, human potential. Psychic phenomena, extrasensory perception, all that stuff. And this was something that A.E. Van Vogt and Campbell were very, very susceptible to. A.E. Van Vogt might be a bit more well known in general circles today than the writings of L. Ron Hubbard that are not Scientology. He repackaged a lot of the ideas in his early pulp fiction into Scientology, but that is beyond the scope of this teaser or pitch. But Van Vogt was also very, very enamored with the idea of expanding human abilities and the human mind by stuff like theory of general semantics by Korzybski, stuff like that. So he was game for for the theories that Hubbard put forth in stuff like Dianetics, which at this time was not yet a cult or, as he said it, a religion. He really, really thought about Dianetics, that it would revolutionize psychology, psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, stuff like that, and it might earn him a Nobel Prize in medicine. Spoiler, it didn't. It did earn him several convictions for practicing medicine without a license, though. So, halfway there, L. Ron. The important point here is that all these theories that Campbell and Van Vogt and Hubbard had are kind of, well, they are the attempt by people that are not scientists to build a theoretical framework that would explain things that are unexplained. It's the attempt to explain by way of half understood physics things that you would probably describe as magical. Stuff like telepathy, telekinesis, teleportation, all that stuff. So, that's basically the thing that Fringe is founded on. The division in French is called Fringe Division for Fringe Science. And the series itself is about a special unit of the FBI that is investigating phenomena that could be described or are described as fringe science within the framework of the show. And they recruit as civilian advisors, if you will, a very, very mentally unwell scientists who spent the last 20 or 30 years in a mental asylum, and his son, whom they need as his caretaker and as his minder. And they recruit him because he seems to have a connection to all these unexplained phenomena that occur in a pattern. It is referred to in the show as the pattern. It seems to be, or there seems to be an as of yet not fully understood pattern of locations where the nature and fabric of reality seem to break down, where these unexplained phenomena occur. And it seems like this mad scientist that they recruit, has a connection to all of that, and they need him to unravel the mystery here. There are shadowy groups involved who seem to be connected to these strange occurrences that make up the pattern. There are also giant industrial conglomerates that are very ambiguous. You don't really know on whose side they stand, and there seem to be some other unaffiliated groups that for some unexplained reason, at least at the start of the series, also seem to be involved or connected to the pattern and all the strange occurrences that make up the fabric of the series. I think one of the connections to Hubbard, especially, is found in this character of the scientist, who is played by John Noble. People may know him as the Steward of Gondor from the Lord of the Rings films. He is basically a stand-in for L. Ron Hubbard, in the sense that he's a combination of what Hubbard tried to present as his public image to his followers, to his believers. The Renaissance man who knew everything, which this character Walter is. He's a brilliant scientist who knows all this stuff about these advanced concepts, this fringe science, and it's all true. But he is, on the other hand, a bit like Hubbard was in real life, a dope fiend. He's a mentally very, very unwell man that really likes narcotics and all the mind-altering stuff he can get his fingers on. He's also basically the comic relief of the series with all his antics, and yeah, I really think that is what elevates Fringe above something like the X-Files. The characters are way more interesting. You have this wacky scientist whom everybody distrusts, who everybody thinks is mental, which he is, but he's also brilliant at the same time. Then you have his son, who is very, very estranged from him and is basically a con artist at the start of the series, and he has connections to, well, shady characters, let's call it that. And then you have the very, very straight government agent, Olivia Dunham. She is, at the beginning of the series, she's an agent for Homeland Security, and is then transferred to the FBI, to Fringe Division. So she is basically our stand-in character, who in the pilot episode comes into contact with all this Fringe science stuff for the first time. So we see the world a bit through her eyes. And I think that is a very it's a much more interesting character dynamic than in the X-Files, where you have basically Mulder, who wants to believe to a fault, whereas on the other hand you have Scully, who is always the skeptic, and doesn't really change from that, even though she witnesses magic, she witnesses alien abduction, she is abducted by aliens herself, and still remains the character in the series that is the skeptic. She never believes that it's aliens, while Mulder is always, his go-to explanation is either aliens or something very, very weird. And Scully never goes along with that, even though she witnesses it for years. And in Fringe, we actually have character development in that sense. The characters are not static in the face of these occurrences, which is very good. And another difference, I would say, is probably the fact that there is kind of what Bertolt Brecht would probably describe as Verfremdungseffekt, an estrangement between what is going on in the plot and what you see on the screen. And by that, I mean specifically the fact that all this super science that they do, all the instruments they use to analyze, and all the machines they build to achieve fantastic effects, look like something from the 60s, or even the 50s or 40s, or even earlier. If they build, for example, a teleportation device, it looks like it is built with very basic components from the hardware store. There are instruments that basically allow you to change your shape. for the Star Trek nerds, it's basically a combination of a pattern buffer and a Cochrane compensator. Yeah, but it fits in your pocket, and it has, I think there is some kind of tape in it to record stuff, and yeah, it doesn't really work like that if you think about it. There are instances where there is communication across dimensions, and it is done via mechanical typewriter in the back room of some shady establishment, and it looks like a typewriter from the 1930s or 1940s. So there's a disconnect between all the super science and how these things that achieve all these incredible results, how they look. And I think that is a very, very good representation of how the series operates, because just like A.E. Van Vogt, a lot of it operates on a kind of dream logic. So if you think about it too much, it doesn't really make that much sense. But it works not only in a story kind of way if you just suspend your disbelief a little bit, but it also works in a visual sense very, very well, because it gives a very interesting contrast between all the relatively realistic facets of the world and the realistic places the show takes place, but it gives it a timeless quality. Sorry, it gives it a kind of timeless quality in the sense that William Gibson achieves a timeless quality by incorporating mechanical storage devices in some of his cyberpunk novels, notably in the Sprawl trilogy. There is a lot of that. Mechanical knickknacks that are the MacGuffin of the novels. For example, I think it's in Count Zero and Mona Lisa Overdrive, there are some anachronistic knickknacks that make up the MacGuffin of the story, and it's basically the same here in Fringe. The anachronistic looking things are the MacGuffin that propels the plot along, and that's it. It gives a vibe. It's a vibe. Fringe as a show is kind of a vibe. Another advantage it has over the X-Files, I think, is that there are not that many filler episodes, if any at all. All the one-off episodes are connected to the pattern or to other factions, conspiracies that are revealed in the plot. Unlike the X-Files, where there's a disconnect between what they call the mythology episodes and the monster of the week episodes. So in the X-Files, you have the overarching mythology of the alien stuff and alien invasion, alien contact, Mulder looking for his sister, stuff like that. And the next week they have to deal with, I don't know, some mutant that escaped from some Soviet nuclear submarine or stuff like that. That has nothing to do with any of the alien stuff or something like that. Or the tombs thing, these modern monsters of the week stories. Fringe doesn't really have that because it is all connected to something else. Would I say that Fringe is therefore written tighter than The X-Files. Not necessarily. It is denser, but I'm not really sure it is tighter, because there is also, for the 5th season, something that reminds me a bit of Babylon 5, where there is a very, very clear cut after the 4th season for the 5th season. It is kind of logically connected to the rest of the series, but it feels very much like what happened to Babylon 5, where they planned out 5 years. After the 4th year, the network said, I don't know if we will renew the series, or after the 3rd year said, I don't know if you will get another season after the 4th. And they went, oh, damn, we have to cram all this stuff we had planned for the 4th and 5th season into the 4th. They did that, and after the 4th season, the network said, oh, surprise, you get a 5th season. And then they scrambled and had to make it work somehow. So there is a clear change in tone after the 4th season, which is not that bad, I would say, because the world of Fringe in the first 4 seasons isn't static either. So that's good. But it kind of harkens back to that thing about dream logic. But I think it's a very, very interesting series to go over, talk about, and have some fun with. That's the most important part, I think. Make some bad jokes. And yeah, to end on a bit of a bad joke, of course the question comes up, is Fringe good? And I don't want to answer this right now, but let me give you a bit of context. A.E. Van Vogt, whom I said was an inspiration for Fringe, he had a critique of his books written by someone named Damon Knight. And Damon Knight's critique of A.E. Van Vogt was devastating. It damaged his reputation and it damaged his career for a very, very long time, because Damon Knight said it was childish, it was implausible, and just wouldn't make any sense. When Knight learned years later that A.E. Van Vogt basically wrote down his dreams for his stories, he apologized and said that his expectation might have been wrong, and maybe you shouldn't judge written down dreams the same way as you would judge other literature, constructed literature. And that's maybe the point where I'm standing right now, and maybe we can go to another position after watching Fringe again, and that is the one of Philip K. Dick. People might know Philip K. Dick. He's a guy who wrote short stories that had very, very interesting titles. These titles were so interesting that Hollywood tended to buy the rights to his stories just to use the titles. Like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, or Total Recall, or stuff like that. And make films out of them. Films that have an, at best, tenuous connection to the source material. And he said that A.E. Van Vogt was his favorite science fiction author. He was the one that got Philip K. Dick into science fiction. Exactly because these stories to him felt more real than Asimov, Heinlein, and Clarke. Because they were not constructed in a linear way from point A to point B to C and then come to a logical conclusion. Dick was fascinated by the breaks, by the cracks in reality that A.E. Van Vogt's stories exhibit. And I think that's a very good description of Fringe. Maybe we can get more towards the Philip K. Dick interpretation of Van Vogt for our viewing of Fringe. So, So, thank you everyone for your attention. If you would be interested in listening to something about Fringe, not necessarily an episode by episode breakdown, I think that's a bit too much. Let me have a look. I think there's quite a lot of episodes. 100 exactly. 100 episodes. That may be a bit much. I think we can compress that a bit. Maybe do 3 or 4 episodes per season, which would still equal 20 episodes. Yeah, so please let me know what you think in the comments or on Blue Sky. And if there is any interest in that kind of thing, I will do it. And if you would be interested to contribute in any way to this effort, you are also very, very welcome. Please let me know. I will put my Blue Sky handle in the down below in the description, and you can contact me there. So, thank you very, very much, and goodbye for now.